The senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam President, parliamentary inquiry. I understand we're in morning business.
That's correct.
Madam President, I ask...
Senator, the Senate is considering a motion to disagree to 2 House amendments under cloture, but senators have requested time to speak as if morning business.
Then I'm free. Let me ask another parliamentary question. I'm free to speak at this point without limitation.
The senator may speak for up to 1 hour on the question before the Senate.
Thank you.
Or the senator could ask requests to speak as if in morning business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that Fern Goodhart, a fellow in my office, be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I am going to speak on the motion, and that's the main purpose of my coming. But I do want to say that, in fact, we will be having a gas price bill and dealing with those issues on the floor very soon. And I know that the Senate Democratic leadership intends to bring such a bill, but it will be a bill that is hopefully comprehensive in its nature and creates real opportunities to reduce gas prices and meet with the challenges. You know, one of the factors that we have today that we could get going already is the 68 million acres that the oil industry already has access to and is largely not drilling on. So before we ask for more, why don't you move on that which you already need to drill on? And secondly...
Will the Senator yield for a question?
If after I make my statement, I'd be happy to. And secondly, I think Americans would be shocked to know that a lot of the domestic production in this country is sold abroad, isn't used here at home. That's something we want to deal with as well, and that will be part of the comprehensive bill, I think, that will come forward. Those are 2 items that could be dealt with immediately, and I think it's critical that, in fact, that doesn't even, and one of those 2 doesn't even need a legislative response, although unfortunately it's going to have to get one because the industry is not pursuing 68 million acres they already have. And so that's really alarming, and I am glad to hear that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle finally agree that market speculation is a critical part of this. We have been at this for some time, and this is the first time we've heard that that is a critical component of it. It's a big part of what many of the oil industry executives have testified before in Congress. And finally, I would note that, you know, it's interesting to me, we bought bills here on critical extenders in the area of making sure that renewable energy sources were incentivized and brought to the mass market concentration that we need so that we can break our dependency on oil, period, whether it be foreign or domestic. And our colleagues on the other side of the aisle objected. So you can't have it both ways. Can't have it both ways. I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman for...
I thank the distinguished senator. My only question, which I'd propose through the chair of the distinguished senator, is I'm excited to hear that we might turn to all of these issues sometime in the future. Just like to know what that timetable will be, and specifically, will the majority leader give us assurance that we will turn this in a full way in an open amendment process before the August recess?
I'd be happy to reclaiming the floor, be happy to give my observation. I do not pretend to speak for the majority leader in this regard, but I do believe that, in fact, we will see such action before this recess is over, and maybe as early as next week. So I am very hopeful and believe very much so that it is every intention of the majority leader to deal with this in very short shrift.
Yield to another question.
I'd be happy to yield one more question so I can get to my focus of my statement.
And that would be the second part of my unanimous consent request, which is very important. Will consideration of these issues involve a full open amendment process on the floor of the Senate rather than the distinguished majority leader doing what he has done every time in the recent past, which is filling up the tree and blocking amendments?
Reclaiming my time on the floor here, let me just simply say It's always the majority leader's desire to have a full and open debate of the Senate. However, there are those of our colleagues who want to use that full and open debate to pursue amendments that have nothing to do with reducing gas prices and dealing with our energy crisis. And that's when, or to be able to pursue in a course that can bring conclusion to a bill that would give that type of relief to the American people, and string it out on issues that are not relevant. And so that's when the majority leader has faced the necessity of moving in a different direction. So I do have expectation that we will have a good debate, and more importantly, that we will have a good bill that will be comprehensive and that will give real relief to the people. And I'm happy to have answered my colleagues' questions. Madam President, the real main purpose that I came to the floor with as we debate the housing bill is to rise again to be a voice for those who have no voice in this housing crisis. And certainly one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle seems to certainly not hear to these cries of children who are being, in one respect, punished through no actions of their own. 2 million of them in this country. I'm not talking about the homeowners, although I'm certainly pleased that the bill we're considering today will have a powerful impact on our nation's families. And I'm not talking about those on Wall Street, as they seem to be the first group the administration rushes to support. I am talking about our nation's children. And I rise on behalf of nearly 2 million children who will be directly impacted by the mortgage crisis. Now, these children are not only taking a huge hit as padlocks get put on their front doors, but now they are likely taking another hit as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle threaten to block a critical amendment that could give them relief. My amendment authorizes $30 million in additional funding into the existing McKinney-Vento homeless education program to support these children. By the way, these children didn't decide to go and get a mortgage. They had no legal authority to make those decisions. They are the ones who get swept up in this process. And they are, for all intents and purposes, the worst victims of this process. As I said, an estimated 2 million children and young people, including 50,000 children in my home state of New Jersey, 20,000 in South Carolina, to mention one other state, and over 500,000 Latino children nationwide will be directly impacted by the foreclosure crisis, placing them at risk of poor school performance, behavior problems, and other challenges as well. What happens? They lose not only their home, they lose the school they go to, move around, they don't have a home, they move from school to school. Well, if you're a student, and I remember those days, not that far that I can't remember, and you get yanked in and out of a school, your ability to perform is just simply undercut dramatically. In just one school district in New Jersey, the number of homeless students doubled this year, from 200 last year to 423 this school year, and that is just in one school district. The foreclosure crisis is clearly having an impact, and the time is now to stop any more school children from being affected. An infusion of funds into the McKinney-Vento homeless education program will help to ensure that students who become homeless and are forced to move from their homes do not also have to leave their schools. Now, there are some that may be able to shrug this off as a small sacrifice. They are the victims of this process, or they are the calamities or casualties of this process, but there's nothing small about the impact of changing schools during this type of crisis. These children are less likely to perform at grade level in math and reading, more likely to be held back, less likely to graduate. There are long-term consequences to what for some may seem a short-term crisis. They are likely to have behavioral issues. One study found that kids forced to move frequently were 77% more likely to have behavior problems than their peers. Another study found that they were 20% more likely to have violent behavior. Now, What's the cost going to be to us collectively in our society when that happens? When that happens. At the end of the day, these children are forced to say not only goodbye to their home that they grew up in and leave their friends behind, but they also have to leave behind familiar schools and supportive teachers and return home to a strange home at night where their lives are often turned upside down. All stability is gone. They're thrown into a riptide with no life vest, while we sit here in Washington just hoping that they survive the storm. Hoping's not enough. We've got to do more than hope for them. We've got to give them a lifeline. This funding would actually help these children. Now, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Program provides homeless students with a variety of supports, such as transportation to school, tutoring, and counseling. Children are the voiceless victims of the foreclosure crisis. As we lower interest rates, as we support the home building industry, as we reform mortgage lending practices, several children's organizations and education organizations have asked for this amendment as a modest way that our nation can support the nearly 2 million children who are suffering the consequences of decisions made completely outside of their control. The foreclosure crisis is, yes, damaging our economy, but let us not forget that the children are the real victims of this crisis. And even worse, they're the silent victims. Can't speak up for themselves. Got no lobbyists here in Washington roaming the halls, advocating for them. It's not fair that these children get lost in the paperwork. They deserve our full support. Now, this amendment is co-sponsored by several of our colleagues, Senators Murray, Brown, to name some. They have the full support of Senator Kennedy. I want to thank Senator Enzi, who worked with me on this amendment to make it have the language be acceptable. Senators Dodd and Shelby, the chair and the ranking members of the committee, who agreed to include it in their provision in the manager's amendment. Had I known that, in fact, we were going to have the objection of one of our colleagues to a bipartisan package, we would have sought an individual vote, but it's beyond that ability today. So in conclusion, as USA Today and the Los Angeles Times and the Chicago Tribune have all written about this critical issue, and a number of respected groups who also support this amendment, including First Focus, the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, the National School Boards Association, the National Education Association, to name a few, we have an opportunity to do something for these children. You know, I hear great speeches on the Senate floor about family and values, and the value of families and the value of our children, and how children are, in fact, our number one asset. And that's true as a nation. They are also our most vulnerable asset. And yet, when it comes time to be able to help these children, the question is Congress going to listen? You know, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to not be listening to their challenges and their pleas. One member is likely going to block this and other important amendments, and the result is that our children are once again going to be unheard, going to be the victims of something they had no role in creating, something that in fact they're going to find themselves not only homeless, but also having the foundation of their educational opportunity completely disrupted in a way that will more likely create failure than success. I hope that my colleagues who talk about values and family values understand the important value of helping our children in this regard. We have to reconsider our priorities, and I, for one, don't intend to rest until these children receive our help and get our support. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.